you know, there's meanings that come from the outside and there's meanings that come from the inside. So I'm really curious about processes that create space for scaffolding understanding in a way that you own, regardless of who your professors are in this case. Now, I first got interested in this from a teaching point of view. I teach, for example, a Modern One class, and those are students who are interested in a whole range of things and not necessarily interested in dancing for the rest of their lives. They're doing it for another reason, which is very different from a Modern Three or a Modern Four class, or even an upper level composition class, where those are folks who the class they're in is something they actually are passionate about already and want to keep doing. So I got interested in how do I make Modern One relevant in the sense that there's space to draw connections. So, so for me, it's centering, helping you all know that you're the center of your world and not necessarily the classes being the center. Sometimes coming out of high school, it's which you're now far from, but coming out of high school, it can be, I must adapt to these teachers and do as they say, rather than I must take in what's being offered and organize it for myself. So that's where I'm coming from. So I'd like to do an exchange at these two tables amongst yourselves. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. And this is not a traditional conversation. It's a no crosstalk opportunity to be listened to. So nobody's going to debate your points. Nobody's going to solve a question or answer a question for you. It's a chance to think out loud with attention. Amongst yourselves, you can decide for second, third, and whoever wants to start.
So should we start like based off of the reflection?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Start there. Yeah. But see if it leads you somewhere else, great. And 2 minutes may feel like a long time. I don't know. We'll see. Okay.
Who's going first?
Here we go. Figure out who's first.
So many people because
So it maybe scared me. I
And
don't
that's
know.
the third round. Good. All right. So as you listen to each other, I'm just now curious. And what's interesting for me also is that this isn't a class. So therefore, what you all are bringing is going to be highly variable. But as you sat and listened to each other, I'm curious to know either what you heard broadly speaking, or if there were moments of common ground that you just could name with what somebody else said, or something surprising that was so far away from where you had been taking the question, but was interesting to you simply because it was a surprise. So I'm curious to hear. Yeah.
I feel like, so, you know, we're all graduating, so we're all kind of like, and we also are all studying things that aren't necessarily directly relevant to our next steps. And so I feel like we're all kind of at this point of like, we've spent the past 4 years like working really hard on these things, but now we're faced with like, all right, here's like my grad school or my job that doesn't necessarily quite apply. And just kind of trying to reckon with like, how do we contextualize that? How do we like place those experiences into the greater like trajectory of our lives and find that meaning, even if it's not going to be directly impacting that next step?
It sounds scary.
Ah.
So scary.
How's it scary?
It just like to like study something for so long and then to like feel like you really want to do something different and to figure out how like that's gonna work out. It's tough.
You know, you're right. It is pretty scary.
I think for our table, like one of the common things is like taking classes like towards our major that like we don't really want to take, but we have to anyways.
And so the fact of that, or anything else in terms of how each of you respond to that stuck with you at all?
I think it's more of like you gotta do what you gotta do kind of.
I think it was interesting though, Jada. I don't know if you realize this. You kind of were saying that like you're taking all these classes for your chemistry degree, but then you're like, but I don't really know if I even want to do chemistry. And maybe I should just do public health, which honestly sounds like it makes more sense with what you said you want to do. So it is. I think it's interesting how maybe we all kind of like get this thing in our mind if we're going to do this major, and then you kind of have to decide very quickly if you want to do that or not, and if not, you're kind of screwed unless you want to take a few extra years to get the credits to switch.
I feel like there's also a feel like picking the major you feel like will give you the most prestige.
Yeah.
Like I've as a theater major, I've gotten a lot of. I remember one year I was in a class and I was like, oh, I won't be able to take like the next level of this because I have to take something from my theater major. The entire class started like cackling when I just said the term theater major. Like the punchline was,
God,
"Look at her, she's studying to do like theater things."
how dare they?
So it's like I've kind of like developed this like defensive, like, oh, self-deprecating, kind of funny, but like also I would do this. But I feel like there's a sense like when you're picking your major, you want to pick the one that people be like, oh, you're studying that, nice. And I feel like that kind of will push people towards majors they might not want to do.
Really interesting. Really interesting. I don't want to cut you off. Any other thoughts or?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say our table, it was interesting how everybody, like we all are, like Katie said, we're all kind of studying things that we're not necessarily going into directly after college, but we all kind of found meaning in those studies in certain ways. So like Katie was like, it gave you a lot of like confidence in terms of analyzing things to do those like sociology classes. And like Jacob, you got really into science communication and you realized that was like important for you. So it's cool how we kind of turned that like seeming non-relevance into being like, well, like actually it gave us some good things along the way. So
Yeah, that's great. Great.